Okay, so without much further ado, let's talk a little bit about micro-apartments. What I wanted to do is to set out some of the trends and some of the themes that we'll be exploring tonight. Now, I've been doing property since 1990. That's when I first started. That's when I rented out my first property, and seen a lot of changes over the years. During the 1990s, when tenants moved into a property, this is the sort of stuff they'll load into their van. And people had a lot of stuff back then, and it required a lot of space. And people would have all this pop quiz. Who knows what that is? Oh, good. A few people who aren't millennials in the room. Okay, yeah, Super Nintendo video games machine. People would have all this stuff in a van. A computer monitor would be massive, would require massive desks, TVs, just their video cassette library and all of that, and stacks of CDs would take up horrendous amounts of room. And people needed a lot of space. Back in those days, single people in London would rent one-bedroom apartments. Couples would often rent a two-bedroom apartment and keep one bedroom spare for all this stuff that they would have. These days, of course, tenants move into a property with one of these. The requirement for space to give you the same utility of living has just shrunk over the years. It's had a dramatic effect. We see this in the office market as well, in commercial property. One of the things that people like Martin Skinner's company, Inspired, have driven, if you like, is that people have converted so many offices into residential space that office rents have gone up dramatically. And a lot of people are finding that their office spaces, the rents have gone up so much, they're having to redesign their offices. A lot of offices are geared around old desks for CRT monitors. They're very deep. They've got a lot of filing cabinets. I mean, we've got an office tenant who was looking in December for more space. And because of the non-availability of office space and the fact that things have gone up so much, what they've done is they've just redone their office suite. They've got rid of all the filing cabinets. Everything's in the cloud. They've got new furniture to cater for the sort of flat screen monitors. And they've managed to employ more people and get them into the same space that they had before, simply because stuff has just shrunk. So this is something that we're seeing quite a lot in terms of trend. The other interesting trend, I think, over the years is the bathrooms. I mean, this is a picture of my bathroom at home taken last night. But we haven't updated it for years. But bathroom space has changed dramatically. In the 1990s, this was a typical bathroom. Even in one-bedroom flats, tenants would want a full-size bath. And in many ways, and the showers were naff. I don't know whether you remember in the 1990s, a shower would be these dreadful attachments that you'd stick on the taps, and you wouldn't be able to control the temperature or anything like that. And tenants would, if you provided a shower, a lot of tenants would want, the market demand was for a bath. You know, and this has changed dramatically. I mean, a typical compact bathroom, this is 1.5 by 1.5 meters. You get everything in it. You know, vertical bathing has meant that it takes less square footage of space to bathe. Now, if someone can come up with vertical sleeping, that might be the next space-saving trend there. What about micro-apartments? Well, the thing with micro-apartment, I mean, this is a fact. I mean, there is a huge squeeze on space. And the rent per square foot and the price to buy real estate per square foot has gone up dramatically. Now, it reaches a point where things just aren't affordable for people. And the only way to make it affordable is to shrink that dwelling size down, but preserve the utility of the space that they once had. So we're seeing now that, I've seen in the rentals market, the people that used to rent a one-bedroom flat for themselves are typically in a room. But they want the utility and the luxury and the privacy as far as possible of having a one-bedroom flat that they would have rented themselves in the 1990s. So the only way to sort of make units affordable in the rental market and in the resale market is to reduce the square footage of those units. But you've got to keep them functional. People have still got to do. You can work with all the trends of things shrinking and the amount of stuff that people have shrink and all of that. But you've got to keep it functional, and you've got to preserve the utility of that space. And the way to do that is by good design. And that's pretty much what we're going to explore today. Now, building micro-apartments is very difficult, if not near impossible, under planning rules. The market wants it. People want them to rent. People want them to buy. But it's very hard to get a scheme through any planning department for purely micro-apartments. In London, our wonderful ex-mayor Boris Johnson came up with a lovely idea called the London Plan in about 2012 and all of that. And he upped the minimum space requirement for a one-bedroom flat. Before 2012, 2013, we were building one-bedroom apartments at 30 square meters with planning permission. But after the London Plan came in, that size requirement was up to 50 square meters. 50 square meters is a lot of space. But if you want to do it under planning, that's what the London Plan says you need to do. The other problem with planning is that the planners want a dwelling mix. So if you want to do an apartment block, say for rental, you might want to have an apartment block comprising of just studios and one-beds, because they will give you the best rental return, there's plenty of demand and all of that. The planners are unlikely to let you build that. They will insist on having a mix of 3 beds and family units and 2 beds and 1 bed. They'll force upon you a mix. And of course, there's social housing provision, Section 106, and all of that sort of stuff as well. Everything's shrinking. People are getting used to smaller stuff. If you got a quality street for a Christmas present, you would have got a lot more if you were given it in the 80s, and you would have got a real tin. Everything's shrinking. It's happening all around, and apartments is no different. So micro-apartments, I've said that it's very hard, if not impossible, near impossible, to do them with full planning and permission. So how do you do them? There are 3 ways to do micro-apartments. The first way is use permitted development, which Neil Taylor will touch on, will talk about, which is conversion of offices, and you can also do light industrial buildings, warehouses as well, into residential apartments. The great thing, the fantastic thing about this PD is that there is no minimum size requirement for each apartment that you create, and there is no dwelling mix requirement. So you've got complete freedom. The freedom is on you, the developer, to decide what your market wants. Now, as a general rule of thumb, if you're doing these to sell on, the buyer market will require slightly larger units than the renter market. So if you're doing a conversion of a commercial building purely for rental units, you could make them slightly smaller than if you're reselling. One of the reasons for that is the mortgage market. The mortgage lenders will not finance a lot of these units if they're too small. But Neil will talk a little bit more about that, because that's inspired speciality, and they've done very, very well at that. The other way, and we talked about this, I think, last month or the month before, and the video is on the VIP site. The other way of doing micro-apartments is flats above shops. There is permitted development to create, you can create 2 flats above a shop under permitted development, and there is no minimum size stipulation on those apartments that you create. And the third way you can get involved in micro-apartments is to take the micro-apartment ideas and put them into a typical HMO building. So instead of having a sort of usual HMO, you try to put in as many self-contained features as you can do into a student room, into a studio room without making it fully self-contained. And I'll talk a little bit about that later today as well. So those are the 3 things, we covered this last couple of months ago, flats above shops. But these are the 2 areas, and so Neil's going to talk about the permitted development for office to resi conversion to make micro flats to sell on. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can apply these principles to studio rooms within HMOs. So that's what we've got on today. How does that sound? Is that okay?